Hi, this is Hillary, and this is a recording of a Torah study live stream that I did on November 13th of 2021. I was having some technical difficulties where my webcam was very laggy, and if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know I typically do my Torah study streams with a webcam and with my face visible in the upper right-hand corner. So what I decided to do was just turn off the webcam. So for this stream, it's just me talking over my Safaria study sheets, and luckily the audio is fine and everything else is normal. So just be aware of that, and I am sorry about this, and I'm going to try to fix it for upcoming streams, but just a heads up that that's what's going on, and thank you so much for watching. So this is Vayetzei. This is the last um, stream we'll be concentrating on the Matriarchs of Genesis. I'm extremely fond of, and who I will miss talking about. But let's say our prayer before Torah study. Brachat Shechina, Eloteinu Barach Haolam, Asher Kidshatnu B'mitzvoteha V'tzivatnu La'asok B'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Holy One, whose presence fills creation, making us holy through the sacred connective action, cultivating words of Torah. Now, so much happens in Vayetzei. So much happens, and we're only gonna really dig into the stuff that's about Rachel and Leah, like the Jacob's ladder story happens in this. So in Vayetzei, so much happens. So I'm gonna go over some of the, I guess, my cliff notes. So Yaakov leaves Canaan for the city of Haran in Mesopotamia in order to find his mother Rivka / Rebecca's relatives. Because remember, so on this Torah stream we go every other parsha, but if you read last week's parsha, this whole thing's happened, of course, where Yaakov and Rivka conspire to get Yaakov the blessing from his father Yitzchak that is intended for his brother Esav, and there's so Esav was very angry and threatens to kill Yaakov, and also Rivka wants Yaakov to marry within their kin group, within among her culture, among her relatives in Mesopotamia. So that's part of why Yaakov gets sent back to Mesopotamia, where he has never been, because he was born and raised in Canaan. But that's where he's headed. So he's on this journey. And on the way, he sleeps out in the wilderness, and he dreams of a ladder that reaches to the sky and has angels going up and down this ladder. Ladder is, I think it also can be translated as stairs, but it's some kind of structure that goes up to heaven, up into the sky, and it's known as Jacob's ladder in English. And he's very affected by this experience of having this dream. And so God makes a promise to Yaakov, and it's an echo of the one made to Abraham and his father Yitzchak, that Yaakov's descendants will have land in Canaan, and that his offspring will be numerous, well, countless really. And Yaakov named the sites Bethel, or Beit El, which literally means house of God. So Yaakov comes to a well near Haran, and he sees Rachel for the first time with a flock of sheep. He doesn't meet with her immediately. He meets with some other residents of Haran and kind of talks to them. He's like, "Hey, do you know Lavan? He's my uncle. I'm looking for him and his family." And they're like, "Oh yeah, Lavan lives here. Here comes Rachel. She's Lavan's daughter. Here she comes with a flock of sheep." And she makes this kind of I think a little bit dramatic entrance. And Yaakov sees her and falls in love with her pretty much immediately and introduces himself, and kisses her too. And then he eventually finds Lavan, and he invites Yaakov to live with the family. Yeah, like Yaakov falls in love with Rachel. So Lavan wants Yaakov to work on the farm, and so they talk about things like wages. And Yaakov mentions that he wants to marry Rachel. And Rachel is the younger of Lavan's two daughters. Leah is the older one. But Lavan and Yaakov agree that Yaakov will marry Rachel in Rachel in exchange for 7 years of work. So, in this culture, we're probably in the West, we're more familiar with the idea of a dowry. A dowry is when a young woman's family, she gets like a pot of money from her family, and she's supposed to kind of give that over to her husband or her husband's family when she gets married. And in some, historically, in some cultures, it'd be very hard for a woman to marry without a dowry, disadvantaging women from lower, like, socioeconomic backgrounds. In the ancient Near East and a lot of other cultures, I think in some African cultures, it's the opposite. It's called a bride price. So the husband's family pays the wife's family um, for marrying her, which sounds really terrible because it sounds like she's being bought. Um, I personally don't think it's necessarily worse than a dowry. In which case, in which situation, the husband's family has to be compensated just for taking her on as part of the family. Because you could also look at it as the wife's family is being compensated for the loss of her labor. Because it's often bride price is often present in agricultural societies. Anyway, but this is Yaakov paying Rachel's bride price instead of with money or animals or, the other things that might be exchanged for marriage. He's paying with 7 years of labor. So at the end of the 7 years, they have a feast to celebrate the marriage. And in the evening, when Lavan is supposed to be delivering Rachel to Yaakov's homestead, he instead, I misspelled Leah's name as Leah, or I guess it looks like Leach. I'm sorry, Leah. That is a typo on my part. But Lavan delivers Leah instead of Rachel, and Yaakov does not realize this deception until morning. And of course, by this time he has consummated his marriage. So there's not really, given the social contract of that time, it's not really acceptable for him to reject Leia at this point. And there's some a lot of people question this, like, how could he not notice? I mean, I guess they didn't have like electric lights at this time, so it was dark by then, I guess. And I think there's even a story. I don't know, is it in Midrash or is it in Talmud, but that Rachel was actually in the room, and like throwing her voice, and which is really uncomfortable to think about. But regardless, Yaakov realizes he's been given the wrong bride in the morning. But this is, of course, an intentional deception by Lavan. I think he did it because he just wanted more labor out of Yaakov, and also because he figured he could marry off both of his daughters in one go, or with one dude. So Lavan says Yaakov can marry Rachel in exchange for another 7 years of labor, and Yaakov agrees to this. There's some misconception with people thinking that that Yaakov marries Leah and then agrees to the 7 year thing and then doesn't get to marry Rachel with another 7 years. That's not true. He gets to marry Rachel very soon after, but he's locked in that additional 7 years of labor in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. So he is like deceived and tricked, and it's not cool. And it's a huge red flag for how Lavan's behavior is later. So Yaakov, of course, wanted to marry Rachel. He's in love with Rachel. He doesn't have feelings for Leah. So that's really awkward for Leah. In contrast, Leah is very fertile and Rachel is not, and she does not give birth for a long time. So this creates some conflict, and in this culture, having children is really, really important. And particularly for women, their way to gain status is to have lots of children, particularly sons. So that creates conflict in the marriage between these three people. So like I mentioned, Leah is very fertile. So she gives birth to 4 sons, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, or Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Levi, and Judah. And Rachel is very upset that she doesn't have any biological children. Um, and we'll get into that part. But she has her maid Bilhah consort with Yaakov, so lets them have sex. And some of you might recall a few weeks ago we talked about how this is something that Sarah did with Avraham, Yaakov's grandparents. Sarah was also childless and had her wife Avraham consort with her maid Hagar. Because in this culture, if a wife does that, the biological children of her maid are considered to be her children. So Bilhah gives birth to Dan and Naphtali, are considered Rachel's sons. We don't know with Hagar, with Bilhah, or we'll find out that this also happens with another maid, whether they're consenting, whether this is something they want. Like maybe it is a way for them to increase their status by having biological children and having their children become part of the family, but maybe it's not something they want. We just don't know because their voices are absent from this narrative, but this is something that that happens. And some in some kind of more progressive recitations during prayers of the names of the matriarchs, some people do also include Bilhah and Zilpah, because they are the biological mothers of the men who become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. So they're like, that is very significant. But regardless, so Leah stops conceiving, and she's had 4 kids, but that's not enough for her. She wants to have more, and perhaps she's jealous of Rachel's adoptive sons. It's not really clear. There's a lot of this parsha, and the parts I don't like are the ones where Rachel and Leah are in competition with each other and seem to be angry at each other. But anyway, Leah stops conceiving, so she has her maid Zilpah consort with Yaakov, and Zilpah gives birth to. His name is pronounced actually in Hebrew God, because that doesn't mean God, G-O-D in Hebrew, because we use other words to refer to God, but it's weird because in English his name sounds like the English word for God. Anyway, God and Asher, and they're not biologically Leah's sons, but they are seen as Leah's sons. We'll get into this. There's this really weird incident where Leah's son Reuven finds some mandrakes, and Rachel wants them, and Leah is like, okay, you can have them, but tonight I'm gonna have sex with our husband. And we'll get into like what that could be about. But anyway, Leah actually starts conceiving again, so then she gives birth to Issachar, Zebulun. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, honestly. I had to check the Hebrew. And Dinah. Dinah is the only named daughter of Yaakov. We don't know if this is because she was the only daughter that Yaakov had with either of his wives or the maids, or because she's the only one that is mentioned. A lot of parts of the Torah that deal with genealogies, there seem to be a lot of boys, and it's probably because the girls are not mentioned because they're not considered to be significant. This is why I say that we don't know for sure that Dinah, at least in my opinion, I don't think we know for sure that Dinah is the only daughter, but we know that she's the only one mentioned. Dinah also later on has her own narrative, a very sad and tragic and violent one. I'm not I have to check if that's gonna be. I don't know if that's one of the parshas we're gonna do because I do every other parsha in this stream, but that is something to remember, and that's probably why she's mentioned, because she becomes important later in the story. Rachel finally has a biological kid. Yay! Good for Rachel. She finally gets to have a kiddo, and his name is Joseph, and of course he becomes really, really important later. So Yaakov wants to leave Canaan with his household. He wants to go back home. Things have already been rocky with Lavan, so he's out. And at this point, he's been there at least 14 years, and he's paid off his debt to Lavan, to be married to Leah and Rachel. So he talks to Lavan, and they come up with an agreement that Yaakov will leave with the spotted and speckled animals in the flock, because Yaakov's labor and the labor of his household has contributed to Lavan's wealth. So it is fair that Yaakov be able to leave with some of the flock, because those are material assets. If you're a farmer or a farmer, they're shepherds, and who like own their flocks. Like, so these are major assets in the culture in which they live. It's like talking about land or a house. To them, one of their major assets is their flocks. So yeah, they come up with this agreement that Yaakov will take the ones that have these certain markings on them. So Lavan, being the sketchy dude that he is, he removes all the spotted and speckled animals and he stores them with his sons who live away from where they live. Yaakov in return finds a way to breed spotted and speckled animals to increase the proportion that he'll be able to take with him. So he finds a way to kind of get back at Lavan. But yeah, this is really sketchy. But Lavan literally reminds me of like abusive bosses that I've had who kind of pretend and have this face, that they are like being super reasonable and they're like helping you out, but they're actually not. They're actually being really sketchy and manipulative. That's what Lavan reminds me of. Anyway, Yaakov has a dream where God tells him, "If you leave and go back to Canaan, I'll be with you." So it's really feeling like it's time to get out of Dodge. And Yaakov gathers Rachel and Leah to him in the fields. And he talks about his dream, and he talks about Lavan's manipulation of him. And Rachel and Leah are like, "Yeah, let's get out of here." So as they're getting ready to go, Rachel waits until Lavan is away from his homestead, and then she steals his idols. Hebrew, they're called teraphim. These are probably little, probably little like god statuettes. We'll get into that because there's a lot of debate about why Rachel does this. Yeah. So Yaakov and his homestead leave, but as they're like on their way back to Canaan, Lavan catches up with them, and he's like, "Why did you take my idols? Why did you steal my idols?" And Yaakov swears that he didn't take them, and Yaakov says anyone who has them in their possession will be killed, because Rachel did not tell Yaakov that she stole the idols. So Rachel, while she's in her tent, while they're settled for the day, I guess, she puts the idols under a cushion that she's sitting on, and she sits on them, and she pretends that she's menstruating, so that when Lavan goes to the tent to inspect it, she's not obligated to stand up to greet him, and so she just does this deception so she can keep the idols. Lavan can't find the idols. He talks with Yaakov. Yaakov basically calls him out and like it's like, you've done this and this to me. Like, I'm taking my wives and I'm leaving. And anyway, they eventually have a pact, and so Yaakov can finally go back to Canaan with his wives. So there we go. That's a very long summary of what happened in this parsha. So I've relied a lot on Sarah the Priestess by Savina Tubal. Those of you who watched my previous streams know this. I think I've probably relied on her a little bit too much, if I'm being honest. But it's a text that is really influential in my thinking, and that I think is very special. And this is probably the last stream where I'll be referring to it, because these Rachel and Leah are the final matriarchs of Genesis. Oh my god. Which I'm a little sad about, because I really like the matriarchs of Genesis quite a lot. But I mean, there'll still be lots more to talk about. So I'm going to have more quotes from Savina Tubal, but I'm also going to have a little bit of some fun interpretations that I got through Sefaria, from Kabbalah, from Talmud, from Mishnah. So it's going to be a bit of a mix. We're going to go back and forth a little bit, so just bear with me, because there's a lot going on. But anyway, so this is first from Savina Tubal, and talking about Yaakov's choice of Rachel and how that could be significant. So Tubal says, Yaakov's choice of a religious woman for a wife followed his mother's ambitions for him. Because remember, Yaakov's mother Rivka wanted him to go back to Mesopotamia to find a wife. It may be that without the blessing from Yitzhak, Yaakov would not have been acceptable as the husband of a woman of priestly rank, since it is immediately after the blessing that he is sent to be married. It seems evident that the matriarchs were more involved with the perpetuation of their culture and religion in foreign surroundings than their menfolk were, because all of the matriarchs, we'll get into it, but the matriarchs are very influential in their children, how they're raised, and what culture they're exposed to. So yeah, I should give a bit more background about Sarah the Priestess by Savina Tubal. Basically, Tubal's thesis, and I'm sure a lot of people in the Kohenet community have read this book, but probably some haven't. Her thesis is that the actions of the matriarchs of Genesis make more sense if you put them into the context of being priestesses, or of having some kind of religious function. Then what they do makes a lot more sense. I'm just gonna put the study sheet in the YouTube channel in again, in case the YouTube channel is just where I back up the recordings, guys. But the study, in case you want to look at the study sheet while we're going through it, it's there. So, and it explains some things. It's a very interesting interpretation. It's one that is a bit controversial, especially because if they were priestesses, they would have been priestesses of a pre-Judaism religion. So yeah, but it and Tubal does this by comparing texts about priestesses in Mesopotamia and in some of the cultures that the matriarchs of Genesis would have come from or would have been familiar with. Okay, so here's another quote from Sarah the Priestess. It is important to note that the names of the matriarchs, Rachel, ewe, and Leah, wild cow, are the titles of Mesopotamian goddesses. Ninsana, lady of the wild cows, was revered by the cowherds along the lower Euphrates. Farther north, among the shepherds, she was known as Dutur, the personified ewe. The names borne by Rachel and Leah are the same titles held by the goddess. That Rachel's and Leah's names are well-known representations of the non-human power in goddesses both in Mesopotamia and in Canaan supports the hypothesis of an early period for the narratives of the matriarchs in Genesis. Okay, so we're going to go back a little bit in the narrative. We're going to talk about when Rachel first appears. So this is when Yaakov is at a watering hole, or an oasis, and he's meeting with the folks near Haran, and he's like, hey, I'm looking for Lavan, tell me where he is. And they're like, oh yeah, Lavan lives here. Here comes his daughter Rachel. And then Rachel appears with a bunch of sheep. So while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's flock, for she was a shepherdess. And when Yaakov saw Rachel, the daughter of his uncle Lavan, and the flock of his uncle Lavan, Yaakov went up and rolled the stone off the mouth of the well, and watered the flock of his uncle Lavan. Then Yaakov kissed Rachel and broke into tears. So this is interesting. So there's a pattern of the matriarchs of Genesis appearing at watering holes. It's often where they meet their husbands the first time, or they meet, or where they appear for the first time, and that eventually leads to them meeting their husbands. Remember that Yaakov's mother Rivka first appears at a watering hole when her future father-in-law, Abraham, sends his servant to find a wife for Yitzhak. And in that narrative, she waters all of his camels, which is a very labor-intensive thing to do, and a generous and hospitable thing to do. In here, it's interesting because it's kind of reversed. We do meet Rachel at a watering hole, but Yaakov is the one who takes the effort to water her animals, or water her father's animals, to water the sheep. And Yaakov has a very emotional response to seeing her, and he kisses her. The rabbis have a problem with this because it's not really considered very appropriate. uh, and we'll get into that. The rabbis have a lot of feelings about the fact that Rachel is out and about on her own and shepherding the sheep on her own, and there's a very clear discomfort, which I think is kind of funny. So we're going to get into that a little bit. They try to kind of explain it and say like, it's okay because of this reason. So here's Ramban, and Ramban is commenting on the line for she was a shepherdess. The intent of this is to relate that Lavan's sheep had no shepherd other than Rachel, since her father turned over the flock to her alone. She alone tended them all the days, and Leah did not go with the flock at all. The matter was thus unlike that of the daughters of Yitro. So remember, Yitro, this is getting later in the story, getting to Exodus. Yitro, or Jethro, is the father-in-law of Moses. He's Zipporah's dad, and he also has a bunch of other daughters. Where all 7 daughters tended the flock simultaneously, as it is said, and they came and drew water. Perhaps due to Leah's eyes being tender. We didn't get into that, but Leah has, I don't know, so there's something up with her eyes when she's described initially. So she has like weak eyes. We don't know entirely what that means, but perhaps due to Leah's eyes being tender, the rays of the sun would have hurt her, or because Leah was older and of marriageable age, her father was more concerned about her. So he's saying because she's older and of marriageable age, it would not have been appropriate for Leah to be out shepherding the flocks, but it's okay for Rachel because she's younger. Yitro, however, was honored in his community, and he was the priest of the country, and he was confident that people would be afraid of approaching his daughters. It may be that Lavan was more modest than Yitro, for Abraham's family was proper and modest, but Rachel was yet young, and there was no concern for her. This is the sense of the verse, and Yaakov kissed Rachel. It may be, as Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra said, that where the Hebrew word for kissing is followed by the letter lamed. Those who don't read Hebrew, lamed is a letter that makes it sound like the letter L in English. As here, Vayishak Yaakov leRachel, instead of the word it means not on the mouth, but he kissed her on the head or the shoulder. So here they're like, no, he's not kissing on the mouth. Don't worry, it's fine. And you feel a need to explain why Rachel is out on her own, and explain why she doesn't have to worry about being attacked or possibly sexually abused, or why Lavan doesn't have to worry about his reputation being damaged by his daughter being out and about. So they feel a need to explain that, which is interesting. Another commentator I found, or HaChaim, has a really fun commentary, because a lot of the commentaries are like this. They're like, look, it's fine for these reasons, but they're like clearly uncomfortable with the fact that Rachel is out on her own. But Or HaChaim has a really good one. He's like, on the other hand, the Torah may imply that Rachel was so competent as a shepherdess that Lavan did not need anyone in addition to her to tend his sheep. This idea is suggested by the Torah's comment where she was a shepherdess. So I love that, because Or HaChaim is just like, guys, she's just really good at it. She just knows what she's doing. That's great. And it's a very refreshing commentary to find, because when the other commentators are like, I don't know about this. So this is from the Zohar, and this is going a little bit deeper. So we'll get into this. This is about the Shekhinah. And this is about seeing Rachel as a manifestation of the Shekhinah, of the indwelling presence of the feminine face of God. When she first appears to Moses, she is being Shekhinah. She's called angel. She did not appear to Yaakov as such, except within the figure of Rachel, as it is written, and Rachel was coming. This is the form of another supernal Rachel, as it is written, thus said the Lord, a cry is heard in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children. and Rachel is coming with her flock, her echelons. Of her father, certainly. And all are counted and accounted for in her hand, for she was a shepherdess. She leads them and is accountable for them. So this references images of Rachel as crying for the children of Israel after they are expelled from Jerusalem and the temple is destroyed and living in exile. And I haven't read a lot of Kabbalah, so I confess that I probably am not putting this in proper context, but I think it is quite moving, and it appears that the Zohar is comparing Rachel as a mother crying for the children of Israel as to her being a shepherdess and guiding the sheep, which is interesting metaphor. And actually reminds me a little bit of Christian texts where Jesus is referred to as shepherding people. Does he do that? Anyway, I imagine that's because both Christianity and Judaism have that as a metaphor in ancient Near Eastern religious texts. But it's quite a moving text, and I was very, very excited to find that. This is like all thanks to Sefaria. It's all thanks to Sefaria, making it easy for you to find text that connects to each other. So it's really nice. So this is when, in the narrative, where Leah has had 4 sons and Rachel has not had a single pregnancy, and she's upset. So when Rachel saw that she had borne Yaakov no children, she became envious of her sister. And Rachel said to Yaakov, "Give me children, or I shall die." Yaakov was incensed at Rachel and said, "Can I take the place of God who has denied you fruit of the womb?" He's saying, like, what can I do? What can you expect me to do? She said, "Here is my maid Bilhah, consort with her, that she may bear on my knees, and that through her I too may have children." So she gave him her maid Bilhah as a concubine, and Yaakov cohabited with her. Bilhah conceived and bore Yaakov a son. And Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. Indeed, he has heeded my plea and given me a son." Therefore she named him Dan. Yeah, and we didn't get into this, and we probably won't for all the sons, but they all have significant names. And Rachel and Leah name all of their sons, with the exception of when Rachel has Benjamin, he's renamed by Yaakov after her death, but because his first name is Ben-Oni, not Benjamin. But anyway, so we're gonna get a little bit into talking. This is again, Savina Tubal, getting into childlessness and what it could mean. So quoting Tubal, Leah had borne 4 sons before Rachel begged Yaakov to give me children or I shall die. To which Yaakov replied, "Can I take the place of God who has withheld the fruit of the womb from you?" If Rachel is a priestess, God has withheld the fruit of her womb by the stricture against childbearing, and for this reason Rachel, like Sarah before her, and using the same terminology, gave her maid her husband so that she might be builded up by her maid's offspring. So we got into this a few streams ago when we talked about Sarah, but Tubal, in making her case that the matriarchs of Genesis are priestesses, compares some Mesopotamian texts about priestesses. And one of them is that priestesses are not supposed to have biological children. So that could potentially explain why 3 out of 4 of the matriarchs have problems conceiving and don't have children until they're quite old, relatively speaking. Well, Sarah especially, but the other, but Rivka and Rachel have children later in life. And also the practice of having a maid or a female servant be kind of a surrogate is one that is present in texts about these priestesses. Anyway, reading more here. Interestingly, Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel are all portrayed as conceiving due to divine intervention. Like the Ugaritic priestess, Rachel believes, it's probably a typo from me because I wrote this in here, believed that she could employ the magic power of the mandrakes, remember the mandrakes, for the aphrodisiacal properties. These women were not ordinary women disgraced for being barren. They were very special women whose lives were closely connected to the service of a deity who cared for them and to whom it seems they had special access in times of need. So here's another quote from Tubal. Another hint of Rachel's special position in the family comes in the sequence in which Rachel, childless after many years of marriage, says to Yaakov almost the exact words used by Sarah before her. Here is my maid Bilhah, consort with her, that she may bear on my knees, and that through her my house too will be built up. And this thing about building up the house is like giving them heirs, having them have like a household and a legacy. That's what that's about. Rachel's situation illustrates more specifically than Sarah's. The matriarch's intention was to build up her own house or lineage, and she was not concerned with whether her husband had issue. Right? Because Yaakov already had 4 sons by Leah. Rachel then was anxious about having her own heir, not Yaakov's. Rachel was observing the same rule in the Code of Hammurabi that Sarah had followed, and those rules applied only to women of a certain religious rank in Babylonia. Code of Hammurabi, very influential ancient law code, and it's the main one that Tubal refers to when she's making these arguments that the matriarchs of Genesis are priestesses. Okay, so that's one interesting way to put it in context. Here's the thing with the mandrakes. So we're moving on a little bit. Rachel has already expressed that she's really upset about not having biological children. Once in the time of the wheat harvest, Reuven came upon some mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." She said to her, "Was it not enough for you to take away my husband? You would also take my son's mandrakes." Rachel replied, "I promise. He shall lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." When Yaakov came home from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You are to sleep with me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." And he lay with her that night. It's hard for me not to laugh reading that because it does seem so ridiculous, especially out of context. Like, what a weird thing to argue about the fact that, like, Yaakov doesn't raise any objection or say anything when this, like, completely ridiculous thing when he comes home. He's like, "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. You will sleep with me tonight." Like, it's kind of ridiculous. But we could put it in some context of what the heck is going on here. So here's some commentary from Sforno. So the mandrakes, a pleasant smelling herb, the fragrance stimulating the human organs related to conceiving and giving birth. Our sages said garlic has a similar effect on people, and that this is the reason why one eats garlic on Friday nights when the husbands cohabit with their wives. Because, of course, it's a mitzvah to have sex on Shabbat. The Dudaim appear to have been known as producing a similar effect. I'm assuming Dudaim refers to the mandrakes. Yeah, this looks like Dudaim right up here in the Hebrew. It's possible that the Dudaim had an even better effect in stimulating the feelings of love between a man and his wife. This idea is based on Song of Songs. "There I will give my love to you, the mandrakes yield their fragrance." Our verse would testify both to Reuven's righteousness and his intelligence, especially considering at the time he could hardly have been older than 4 or 5 years old. I kind of disagree. I don't think Reuven entirely knew what he had. Well, that might not be true. But I personally don't feel like this is about Reuven. But this gives us an explanation. Mandrakes can either be an aphrodisiac. Wait, what's my other text say? I can't remember. This is something else. Mandrakes can be an aphrodisiac, or they can be something to help with fertility. I don't think Rachel wanted them for the aphrodisiacal properties because we know that Yaakov was in love with her. I don't think that was like a problem. He was very into her. I think she wanted them as a fertility thing. I think she was like, "I can use this. Maybe I can conceive," because that's what she wanted so much. So it puts it in a bit of context, and why she wanted them so bad, and why she has this very strange argument. But Leah, even though Leah already has so many children already, she does feel a certain sense of competition because she knows that Yaakov is not into her. So it's sad. Okay. So this is after Yaakov and Lavan have been kind of negotiating for Yaakov to leave, and Lavan does a thing where he like takes all the spotted and speckled animals so that Yaakov won't have them, and then Yaakov like figures out how to breed. It's a whole thing. So when that is happening, Yaakov was like, okay, we have to freaking leave. I'm gonna talk to my wives. So Yaakov had Rachel and Leah called to the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father's manner toward me is not as it has been in the past, but the God of my father has been with me. As you know, I have served your father with all my might. But your father has cheated me, changing my wages time and again. God, however, would not let him do me harm. If he thus said, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks would drop speckled young. If he said, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks would drop streaked young. God has taken away your father's livestock and given it to me. Once at the mating time of the flocks, I had a dream in which I saw the he-goats mating with the flock were streaked and speckled and mottled. In the dream, an angel of God said to me, Yaakov, here, I answered. He said, note well that all the he-goats which are mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, and mottled, for I have noted all that Lavan has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Remember, that's what the Jacob's ladder thing, when he has the dream about the angels going up and down. Now arise and leave this land and return to your native land. Then Rachel and Leah answered him, saying, have we still a share in the inheritance of our father's house? Surely he regards us as outsiders now that he has sold us and has used up our purchase prices. So this refers to their bride price, which was Yaakov's labor. Truly all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do as God has told you. So like, yeah, this is no good. Let's get out of here. So this is Tubal again. Rachel and Leah were called to the field where Yaakov was with his flocks to interpret his dream. A function of priests and priestesses in the Near East was to supply information about current and future events, whether important or trivial, thought to be known only to the deities with whom they were in some way in communication. The sisters' interpretation of the dream gave Yaakov permission to flee from their father Lavan. This is from this is a Hasidic text. I don't know. I just thought this was kind of nice, because a lot of the commentary on Yaakov talking to Rachel and Leah, I don't know. I didn't really vibe with it. It was about like the fact that Rachel speaks first, even though she's the younger sister. We kind of know that Rachel is a more significant protagonist because we concentrate more on her. Yeah, but anyway, but this text is kind of sweet. It says, this is also the meaning of what Rachel and Leah said. All the wealth that God has taken from our father belongs to us and to our children. Specifically, it belongs to us and to our children, since one's wealth is on account of one's wife, and the children are dependent on her because a wife is the tree itself, wealth is its branches, and the children are the fruits that grow on these branches, as explained above. This is the deeper meaning of what our sages of blessed memory taught. When someone robs another person, it is as if he robs him of the souls of his sons and daughters. So it's like, of course, he talks to Rachel and Leah about it because they're very much a part of the wealth and well-being of the household. So, duh. So anyway, now we're getting to the part where, Yaakov and his household are like, we're getting out. And while they're doing their preparations, Rachel steals Lavan's idols. So meanwhile, Lavan had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household idols. Here's Tubal. It is also important that it was Rachel who took the teraphim. Rachel, not Leah, is the protagonist of the story, not simply as tradition implies, because she was the beloved of Yaakov, but because she had an important function to accomplish. Rachel's function, like that of her predecessors Sarah and Rivka, was concerned in part with group membership. One of the characteristics of the Matriarchs kinship group was ultimogeniture. So, primogeniture is where the firstborn has some sort of special privileges, whether it's inheritance or in status or whatever. Ultimogeniture is where it's the youngest. And we see throughout Torah, ultimogeniture is actually the norm, or it seems to be the primogeniture is kind of bucked and overturned and becomes ultimogeniture. We see this both with sons and daughters. Obviously with Yaakov. Yaakov is the younger son of Yitzchak and Rivka. Esav was set to get his father's blessing and the birthright, and Yaakov and Rivka conspired to make sure that it went to Yaakov. And that's also the case with Rachel and Leah. Leah is the older, excuse me, but Rachel is dominant. Rachel is the one who propels things in a certain direction, and in taking the teraphim, that is one way in which Rachel does that. And also perhaps, we also get other hints at her leadership in that she is a shepherdess. There are other instances of ultimogeniture, but those are the ones that are probably most relevant to us. And I should say the more conventional, and often most of the commentators, when they're looking at this passage, they think that Rachel was trying to wean her father of his idolatry by just taking the idols, and eventually they are buried when they get to Canaan, although they are buried by Yaakov, not by Rachel. But Tubal has a different interpretation, because Tubal views Rachel as a priestess. He's saying Rachel took the teraphim as a way because she considers her, because she wanted to have them to have control for spiritual reasons, and also it indicates her leadership. Okay, so here's the instance of Yaakov's household is on the run. They want going back to Canaan, and Lavan stops them. This is Lavan speaking. Very well, you had to leave because you were longing for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Yaakov answered Lavan, saying, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters from me by force. But anyone with whom you find your gods shall not remain alive. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have of yours and take it. Because remember, Rachel did not tell Yaakov that she stole the teraphim. Yaakov, of course, did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Sorry. I should just read the text. So Lavan went into Yaakov's tent, and Leah's tent, and the tents of the two maidservants. That's Bilhah and Zilpah. But he did not find them. Leaving Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Rachel, meanwhile, had taken the idols and placed them in the camel cushion and sat on them. And Lavan rummaged through the tent without finding them. For she said to her father, Let not my lord take it amiss that I cannot rise before you, for the period of women is upon me. She literally says the way of women, which I guess is the Hebrew, just the way of referring to menstruating more delicately. Thus he searched but could not find the household idols. I always found this passage kind of funny, and I think people, I think some folks have found it rude that I find it funny. I think I find it funny because it seems very modern to me. And so much of Torah seems very distant and foreign and ancient, but pretending that you're on your period to get out of something feels like a very modern thing to do. But I guess it really isn't, because people have been menstruating since the dawn of time. But anyway, so here's more from Tubal about Rachel taking the teraphim. Rachel's carrying off of the teraphim both possess a religious aspect. Rachel had every right to the symbols of her position, if that is what the sacred objects represented to her, especially after the behavior of her father toward herself, her sister, and her husband. She understood perfectly the importance of her act and wisely decided to keep it secret even from her husband. Because possession of sacred images betokened clan leadership and spiritual power, Rachel could act without peril to her husband and ensure succession to her own offspring. Again, represents her taking control and taking spiritual leadership. It just occurs to me while reading this that it is kind of symbolic that Rachel pretends to be menstruating because the fertility potential and but things like succession and legacy and all of that comes through her womb, and that didn't occur to me until just now that being connected with the Teraphim and her religious leadership is important. Anyway, so I'm gonna end with this last quote from Tubal. Matrilocal residence. I should say what matrilocal is. Matrilocal residence is when the husband travels to marry. The husband lives with the wife's family after marriage. Patrilocal residence would be the opposite, when the wife moves into the husband's household or moves near to him when they married. Anyway, so this is an story is kind of an example of matrilocal, because initially Yaakov goes to where his mother's family is from and lives within the area where his wife's family is. But I guess it technically ends up changing to patrilocal because he takes his wives back with him. Regardless, matrilocal residents and their own close ties to matrikin gave Rachel and Leah extensive participation in decision-making. They decided between themselves whom Yaakov would service as sexual partner. They named their own offspring. They made decisions on the distribution of family wealth. They gave Yaakov their approval when he decided to flee from Lavan, their father, and to return to Canaan. And Rachel took the teraphim, the family religious symbols, on her own authority, against her father's wishes, and without even the knowledge of her husband. So that's about the size of it. Normally, I would turn on my camera so I could talk to you guys, but since it's acting up so much, I'm going to keep it off. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for bearing with me as this has been going on. I know it's been a huge pain in the butt, but you know, that's just how it is. I'll try to figure out what the heck is going on. I might need to update some things. I might need to install some updates. Or I might even I haven't updated to Windows 11 yet, and honestly, that might be the issue. But hopefully, I'll have it resolved by next time I'm streaming, and it won't be a problem. But I'll have to fiddle around with a lot of things to try to figure out exactly what's going on. But I do this. I should mention, this is part of my priestess project. I was so stressed at the beginning that I forgot to mention. This is part of my priestess project. I'm, in the process of becoming a Kohenet. I'm not ordained. But this is for me. Yeah, it's my priestess project. So I do this every other week, so I will not be streaming next week. I will be streaming in 2 weeks on November 27th. And that parashat is Vayetzei. So if you would like to join me next week, November 27th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time for parashat Vayetzei. Thank you so much for your patience. I will update, at some point upload an edited version of this to YouTube so it can be viewed without me panicking about technical difficulties at the beginning. But Shabbat Shalom, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me, and be safe and well. Bye.